how reliable, how dependable, how efficient is this? Are there other innovative ways that come up through the digital means? And particularly as we see that our people are getting more and more digitally savvy uh, of, of, uh, of utilizing new innovative measures to do this. So there is a big range of issues that is there. We are also seeing that there are, and we've been discussing this earlier as well, that there are new migration corridors that are opening. So the traditional modes in which remittances have been coming back primarily from the Gulf region will now have to be supplemented in new markets, in new migration destinations, whether they be in East Asia or Europe, where more migrant workers are expected to go, and how they would negotiate these new paths. So we have an exciting subject to discuss. We are very, very delighted that we have Dr. Rajan, who's going to be moderating this particular session, and of course, the distinguished lecture by Dr. Ratha. So I'm very eagerly looking forward to the outcomes and the suggestions that they come forth at this session, because that would be a very key ingredient in how we continue our engagement with the various stakeholders to make policy more responsive and more stakeholder friendly, particularly for the migrant workers. So welcome everybody once again, and I do hope that all of you will keep ICM activities in mind and give it all the support that it deserves as we have ICM move towards becoming the premier think tank on all migration studies within India. Thank you and welcome once more.
Thank you, sir, for the inaugural remarks and the for encouraging words. We'll now move to the main panel and welcome Professor Rajan, who is the chairman of IMAD. And Professor Rajan has immense experience on migration studies in India. He has undertaken various projects. He's the brain behind the Kerala Migration Surveys, which is widely cited everywhere on migration related work. So Professor Rajan will be moderating today's discussion. Professor Rajan, may I request you to introduce the speaker and take over the proceedings?
Thank you very much, Surabhi, for the introduction, and also the Secretary Sri Sanjay for the welcoming remarks. I am going to limit my introduction of Dilip in a few words, because I think anybody today in the world talks about remittances, I think Dilip will be there. So Dilip is almost synonymous with remittances. I think that is, so I don't think we need a bigger introduction than anywhere you look at remittances, anywhere in any part of the world, Dilip Ratha means remittances, and remittances mean Dilip Ratha. I think that is something we all proud of Dilip Ratha, but I would like to say two words about him. I think this is also relevant for many people who listen to this particular talk. I am also waiting for his talk because he's talking about future of remittances. In fact, I am more interested on future of migration from India, because they are the one going to send remittances. So I am very keen on this talk, because that will add some value to my own research on future of migration from India, which will lead to remittances back to India. So I think we are in the same corridor on talking on the different subject, but both add value to that. And Dilip Ratha is one of the person, I think, is that we have two types of people in the world. One is researchers. They do research and that is the end of it. And there are people who are policy makers and they don't do research. They only make policies. Sometimes with the data, with the evidence, without evidence, this will be all going on. But Dilip Ratha is one of the, one of the group of people who influence policymakers globally. I think that is the beauty of Dilip Ratha. He influences policy making on diaspora bonds, remittances cost. That way he played a major role globally to influence policymakers in many countries, including India. He was in India, prior to COVID, to discuss on diaspora bonds in Kerala in the wake of floods. So I think he is widely known. So I'm not going to give more time to introduce him, and I am also not going to give any remarks right now. I would like to listen to you as much as you are all waiting for him. Once he finishes his talk, I will give my remark, then I'll open it for the floor. It is Dilip's time. Dilip, floor for you.
Thank you, Rajan. It's always wonderful to see you and be on the same panel with you. But I want to also start by thanking Mr. Bhattacharya and Ms. Singh and the ICM for inviting me to this presentation. I was actually working with the previous Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs when the ICM was set up. And I was very proud to see that finally Government of India has set up a center which focuses on what is not only a very important issue, key significant issue for India, but what is going to become even more important in the future. And we are looking at a very tangible aspects of that benefit that particular topic brings to India. That is the topic of migration and remittances, and in particular, the tangible part is remittances. The tangible benefit that remittances bring to India, and the importance of that is growing, and the importance of that actually becomes even larger during times of difficulty, like the COVID-19 crisis, or prior to that, the global financial crisis, for example. We know that when India came very close to having real balance of payments difficulties in 91, it was the diaspora, the migrants, who were perhaps the cause and the savior, both of that crisis. Well, I mean, the main cause was probably oil price and all those things, but really, migrants played a very important role, and the non-resident Indian deposits at that time and remittances. I'm talking about 91, the balance of payments difficulty that India had. Those days, they played a very important role. And then India did the diaspora bonds, the Resurgent India bond, and then the India Millennium deposits. And again, showing that migration has proved to be migration has proved to be again to the come to the rescue in some ways of India. So I will talk a bit about the significance of migration and remittances, but particularly focusing on remittances to the Indian economy. And let me start by pointing out that you know India is the largest source country for international migrants in the world. And on internal migration, which I'm not going to talk much about, we also know that with several hundred internal migrants, India is among the largest. I mean, if not the largest, maybe after China, India might be the one with the largest number of internal migrants as well. Actually, with China, India tends to go neck to neck on migration and remittances. And there are questions about how do we define diaspora or migrants, but I'm not going to get bogged down by that. But between, whatever definition you use, Indian diaspora is visible everywhere in the world. And it has been the case for centuries, right? That's what we are beginning to see now in tangible ways when data have become available. So India is supposed to be, or is, I think it is believed to be the largest source of international migrants in the world, with the official numbers are in the range of 18 million migrants from India in foreign countries. These are foreign-born people, meaning people born in India who are in other countries. So we are not talking about second generation, third generation, and higher generation diaspora members. That 18 million headline number compares with a global total of international migrant stock of 280 million, roughly. More than half of the Indian migrants more than 9 million, close to 10 million, maybe even a little more than 10 million Indian migrants are actually in the GCC countries, the Gulf countries. UAE in particular has officially about 3.5 million, unofficially probably larger. Saudi Arabia has another 2.5 million. And, often there is a tendency for us to look toward the United States. But United States now has about 2.7 million, so under 3 million Indian origin people. And yet, because US is so much richer, and there are Indian migrants in the UK as well as in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and all that. Indians are everywhere, but because the income levels tend to be higher of the Indian migrants in the US and UK and Australia, um, remittances actually a larger share of remittances, relatively speaking, larger than the share of migrants. Larger share of remittances comes from actually the so-called North. Now, even after accounting for the fact that there are probably twice the number of migrants in the GCC countries as there are in the so-called high-income OECD countries or the so-called North or the so-called West, US, UK, and all that. Despite that fact, I think remittances are roughly, coming in about equal proportion, 40%, 40% from the GCC countries. GCC countries, maybe it is a little more than 40% now, closer to 50%. We have data, but the data are not very granular and not very timely, not very good as well. There is a significant amount of informal flows. So one observation one can make right away, well known to most of us, but it is a striking fact that migrants in the so-called North, the US, UK, Europe, tend to be highly skilled. And, in the current crisis, I'm in right now in Washington, D.C., in the United States. And when you see people commenting on TV or news reports about the COVID-19 virus, you often see or hier Indian names, Indian American voices. These are doctors, right? Mostly doctors. So we have a whole lot of very highly skilled Indian origin people in the so-called West, and they earn a lot. But then they have their families with them, and they probably remit home money, but definitely compared to the lower skilled migrants who are in the GCC countries, the majority of Indian workers in the GCC countries are lower skilled workers. Compared to them, remittances as a share of income of Indian migrants from the North, so-called North, is actually very, very small, relatively speaking. It is very sizable because the income levels are very high. That is worth keeping in mind. Now, in the case of the lower skilled migrants from the GCC countries, they earn $200, $300 per person per month. And out of that, they remit almost everything other than something as basic as spending money on buying rice or chapatis, and if the rice price goes up as it did in 2009, I remember 2009, 2010, migrant workers from India, Bangladesh, and all, they actually sent less money home just because the price of rice went up, meaning that other than consuming a little bit, almost everything they earn, they send back home. This is interesting because one reason why they do that is because they don't have a permanent pathway to permanent residency in the GCC countries, whereas the migrant workers in the United States or Europe, they have a pathway. And when you have a pathway to citizenship or permanent residence, then you begin to grow roots there. And you can take a decision that you are not going to come back home. But in the case of migrants, in the migrant workers in the Gulf countries, the contracts um, are for employment contracts are for 2-3 years, and people have been there for 30 years, but always on a rolling contract, and they are never sure that they can stay there. So there is some change in policy more recently, but we have to see how many people it would impact. Not many. It is not going to impact many people, which means that remittance flows from the Gulf countries will remain important for the future. I think let's keep that thought in our mind. Um, Another fact I want to mention, and I want to kind of get it out of the way, but it is worth keeping it on our radar screen, is that India, India is also a very large host country for migrants. And in fact, the largest migration corridor in the world is quite likely Bangladesh to India. It may not be Mexico to the United States. On paper, yeah, officially, Mexico to the United States is the largest migration corridor in the world, and United States, with about 52 million, 53 million foreign-born people, is the largest host country for migrants, destination country for migrants. I think India is a very large host country for migrants, mostly from the region, but we have a history of people coming from everywhere. Um, some of them actually came and took over, if you remember, which is what we are celebrating 75 years ago. We became independent or something. But we have a history of migrants in the United States, migration to the, sorry, what am I saying? India has a history of migration from the region, and India is the second largest, if not the largest, migrant hosting country in the world. That data, for various reasons, is not available. And I think we need to bear that in mind, because when we talk about 5 million migrants or more than that million migrants, each individual is a human being, and that individual is probably attached to 5, 10, 20 more individuals, either in India or out there in their own country, and in their own country, meaning their country of origin. And I think we need to remember that as we want remittances to be facilitated from outside into India, we also need to think about facilitating remittances out of India. And right now it is by policy banned, as you know, most cases. And in some cases, even if it is working, it's not working very well. So what happens is that in that case, money goes underground. Money will flow, people will find ways. So money is going underground and nobody benefits. Migrants are losing because they're paying maybe 2 times the price, 3 times the fees for sending money. Sometimes the money goes missing and the country loses out because the flows become invisible. Both the origin country as well as the source country for remittances, they become invisible. This point applies to India as a recipient country for remittances as well. Also, it applies to India as a source country for remittances. So whatever I am going to say about facilitating remittances to India is going to apply also to facilitating remittances out of India, outward remittances. It's not only about just facilitating outward remittances for tourism or for paying student tuition bill for Indian students abroad. By the way, I just came back from Toronto 3 weeks ago, and I was struck by how many Indian students are working in restaurants, and it is a fact that I think worth mentioning. It was not part of my presentation originally, but I would like to mention this. I was struck by how, let's say, the downtown Toronto area, almost all the restaurants have Indian students running the restaurants. So they are the waiters, they are the cashiers, they are also the dishwashers. And these are students, these are college students, university students. They are running the restaurants there. So Canadian government allows students to work outside the campus. United States government doesn't allow that. And that is benefiting the local community hugely, right? By the way, that also leads to all sorts of anti-immigration rhetoric. And in particular, they target the Indians, the entire anti-immigration types, and Indian students in this case. It's not Indian, just anybody. These are highly skilled people. They will go on to become the space scientists and the doctors of Canada and the rest of the world. But they are being targeted. And that was actually a huge election issue in the recent election that just concluded on Monday. Um, just just on a radar screen, there is that whole student population which kind of falls out of the our radar screen. Okay, I want to move on to the more substantive aspects of the importance of remittance flows. We know that India is being the largest source country for migrants. It is also the largest source recipient country for remittances. So last year, 2020, India received about $83 billion in remittances. And compare that with flows of, let's say, foreign direct investment, where we have what? Entire departments, we have entire international institutions, and we have the whole multinational corporations, right? I mean, their household names in India as well as everywhere else. Foreign direct investment inflows to India is in the range of 60 billion, and remittance flows are 83 billion. Even if you combine all the flows to the stock market, foreign money coming through the stock market and the bond market into India, even if you then bring in all the official aid that comes into India, which is declining and which has always been very small, remittances dwarf the sum of foreign direct investment, portfolio flows through the stock market and bond market, and official aid. In other words, it is perhaps the largest single source of external financing for India. A remarkable fact during the COVID-19 crisis was that the projected decline, expected decline, did not materialize in remittances. Remittance flows proved to be resilient in the face of the COVID-19 crisis. And there are many reasons for that. One is the increased need for help from families, but very importantly, migrants were willing to support the families even when they were themselves having all sorts of difficulties. So it is the willingness of migrants to continue to support families in the face of increased need for help from families in India. So that is, I think, the foremost reason. And that willingness to send money home to support families of migrants, that willingness was enabled in the host countries where these people are by counter-cyclical fiscal policy, the cash transfer programs, the employment support programs that many large host countries put in place. They did benefit directly sometimes migrant workers, and definitely they benefited indirectly by keeping employment up or not letting it fall too much. That said, there is also some amount of return migration because it is true that in some sectors like tourism, for example, definitely there was a layoff and migrant workers lost jobs, and many of them, why would they stay there, right? So many of them did come back home. We know there are anecdotal reports of millions of people coming back to India, perhaps a million to Kerala alone. Rajan would know that. But we need better data on that. Now, interesting thing is that when these migrant workers come back home, they actually bring their cash with them, especially if they come back from countries like the Gulf cooperation countries. Then they have no pathways there, so why leave the money there? They will come with whatever they have, either in the bank account or under the mattress or wherever they have it. They bring it back with them. Now, interestingly, that means that remittances go up perversely. So that is another reason. And mostly it is a counter-cyclical fiscal policy leading to better than expected economic performance better than expected employment levels of foreign workers and domestic workers in host countries. That was the main reason for the resilience of remittances. Now, one interesting phenomenon also was a shift in flows from informal to formal, and also from cash to digital. Um, Cash to digital is known because became a lot of things became easier to do digitally, including these conferences that we are doing these days through virtual means. But there was also difficulty in sending money through the face-to-face contacts that often informal channels require. Informal channels are sometimes hawala dealers, or sometimes actually oftentimes it is somebody going home, a friend or family member, and you or yourself, and you carry cash or you give cash to these people to carry. It's perfectly legal, but with travel becoming restricted during COVID-19, informal flows were affected. At the peak of the crisis in April and May, in fact, many money transfer companies were just not even open. So even if you had money, you couldn't send money home. And that effect was felt. So in those months, um, remittance flows to India actually declined by 8% in the second quarter 2020. Third quarter, there was another fall of about 6.5% or so. It was less of a fall than we were expecting, but there was a fall nevertheless. There was also a one-off effect, and I think I'm not doing very well on time. So I'll try to wrap up in 5 minutes. Rajan, is that okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thanks. So there was also a one-off effect last year. The Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, that was cancelled. The year before, in 2019, something like 1.8 million people visited Saudi Arabia for pilgrimage. And last year in July, when travel bans disrupted travel to Saudi Arabia, I think a large amount of that money, which is usually sent by migrant workers in the Gulf countries to their families uh, for air tickets and all that to facilitate that pilgrimage, I think a lot of that became remittances that was sent home, and that also was very visible in Bangladesh and Pakistan. I mean, actually interesting question. Why is it that in Bangladesh remittances are increasing at a clip of, let's say, 30% year on year, 30%, 40% year on year? Why? And why in Pakistan they're also increasing in double-digit terms, and why they are not doing so in India? I actually don't know that yet. What is going on there? Nobody seems to know. So there is a bit of work to be done on why India is a little bit of an aberration. But that Hajj cancellation effect on remittance flows last year is very, very visible in Pakistan and Bangladesh data. You don't see that in India data, but I think it is there. Somehow it is there. We need to look for it. One problem, and it's a to-do item for ICM and for the government of India, is to actually start collecting data on remittances on a monthly basis. It's not enough to have quarterly data, and quarterly data that comes out like 3 months, 4 months later. When the flows are as important as they are, I think we need to monitor these flows regularly, because if we make a mistake, a lot of people will actually not eat properly, right? I mean, we are talking about very, very important um, source of income. So a couple of points about the high frequency trend. I mentioned there was a fall of about 8.5%, 6% in the second quarter last year. If you look at the trajectory of, and maybe here I'm going to share my screen so you can see, let me see if I can show my screen. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes.
Very good. So, I mean, I just want to focus on the right-hand side. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger. The columns there, the yellow columns, they show year-on-year growth rate in remittances, and the right-hand circle is the effect last year in the second quarter, third quarter. There has been some recovery after that. And the red line, red line is crude oil price, this oil price. And you see an interesting correlation between oil price movement and remittance flows, growth of remittances to India. Now, oil price, as you know, affects the GCC economies. That's the mainstay of the Gulf countries. And there is a clear effect of low oil prices on remittance flows to India. You know, an interesting anecdote is in 2009, remittance flows to India fell by something like, you know, 30 odd percent. That was 2009 first quarter. Why didn't they fall that much in a much deeper crisis? And I think that is because I think oil price dip was much more significant in 2009. So this is an important aspect. This brings cyclicality to remittance flows to India. And if you are thinking about projecting remittance flows to India on a high frequency basis, you know that oil price data are available like almost to the hour, right? Every day, oil price data are available. So you might be able to draw a correlation and project remittances 3 or 4 months in advance by looking at that. But there is another interesting chart I want to show you. It is more of a structural, and I say problem with the emphasis on the word problem. It is a problem for India. It is that the Mitakat policy, the indigenization policy, the policy in Saudi Arabia and UAE and in the GCC countries to promote local employment, their own native-born employment by discouraging foreign workers. That is not on paper only. It is already happening. And in this chart, if you're able to see, you see that the number of registered foreign workers in Saudi Arabia used to be 8.5 million in you know, about 4 years ago. Now it is down to about 6.5 million. And you know, you're talking about a significant decline of 2-3 million people out of, you're talking about 2 out of 8, 3 out of 9, kind of a 30% decline. And this is on a downward trajectory going forward. It's not going to go up. And this is the overall foreign worker level in the Gulf countries. Then there is the second effect, which is also policy induced. They are diversifying away from traditional sources of migrants. They are going to Africa. They're looking for cheaper labor and less vocal labor, less vocal workers, meaning that that process of diversification away from India will be there. This is a high risk, and for the future, it doesn't bode well in some ways. So that's basically the story on the high frequency flows. And on remittance costs, I mean, again, I'm going to show you this chart. You know, it's very cheap to send money from Singapore to India. It costs 2.2%. But if you are sending money from Thailand to India, it's like 16%. Japan to India is 12%. South Africa to India is 12%. I mean, wherever the countries have regulations, meaning host countries and source countries for remittances, like Thailand or Japan or South Africa or Sweden or France, wherever the countries have regulations that favor sending money only through banks and not so much through money transfer companies, that actually increases the cost of sending money home. So there is a huge agenda to be done, a huge agenda to be addressed to bring down the cost of sending money to India. And imagine if you know, India is receiving over $80 billion and remittance costs are brought down by 3% or 4 percentage points. Now that would be 3 times 80 or 4 times 80, you're talking about $3.2 billion, right? So it's a significant amount of money that can be saved in the hands of poor people. So with COVID crisis, supporting stranded migrants and supporting return migrants, providing vaccines and all that is important. But I want to highlight that as the trend is definitely moving towards a shift in remittance flows towards digital channels, a prerequisite for digital remittances is a bank account. Bank account for the migrant workers in the host countries, and bank accounts also for households at home in India. And both don't have bank accounts, both. So India has a lot to do in terms of improving financial inclusion. Um, and then I'm going to move on to the final slide, maybe final 2 slides, and make a couple of remarks about first the global remittances agenda. As I summarize it, it has 4 components of where are we, where is India in this picture, and I'll only highlight a couple of them, and we can take up others in the Q&A. Diaspora bonds, huge potential. India is a leader in this. It raised about 9 billion, or if you count the 91 diaspora bonds, then you are looking at close to $10 billion in bond financing that India has already done. And it has been very successful because even when the bond matured, the money didn't leave the country. Mostly it stayed in India. And we had to reclassify remittances. You'll see a huge jump in remittance inflows to India in 2000. 2003, that period. So diaspora bond remains a potentially huge instrument for mobilizing diaspora savings. And a simple point is that migrant workers, even in the Gulf countries, send money home, but those who are like drivers and teachers and upper class, higher skilled, medium skilled people, all of them actually keep some money with them. And that money, if it is under the mattress, doesn't carry interest rate. If it is in the bank, it also gets 0% interest rate these days in dollar terms. So if we offer a bond that gives 3%, 4% interest rate, they will send money home. And this is, they will buy these bonds. So that's the beauty of diaspora bond. And we were trying to do one in Kerala. We will see how that progresses. Linking remittances to mortgage loans, consumer loans in India, that's another potentially very lucrative area. And a couple of words about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, blockchain, and all that. There are many things there. So there is the cryptocurrency, which uses the blockchain technology, and Bitcoin is an example of that. There are stable coins which are linked to the dollar, and then there is a central bank digital currencies that are coming in the future. Now, central bank digital currencies are not relevant yet. The stable coins, they just mimic the digital channels. Bitcoin and such cryptocurrencies, including the Ripple and Stellar, and there are 1,500 odd cryptocurrencies in the world. The problem with using Bitcoin for transferring remittances to India is that the flows are usually one way. 83 billion coming in, maybe 3-4 billion leaving the country. So mostly it is money coming in constantly. What that means is that the migrant would buy from dollars Bitcoin. Bitcoin then would be transferred to India. That Bitcoin then has to be transferred to rupees, provided that is possible only if Indians are willing to pay rupees to buy Bitcoin, and there is not enough demand for Bitcoin in India. So until that happens, Bitcoin price will fluctuate 10%, 20%. Within an hour, it can fluctuate 10%. That will wipe out the entire migrant saving, the entire remittances. So it's not a big force yet. And that's basically most of the what I wanted to say. Just to whet our appetite, so to say, I want to just mention that India could mobilize diaspora saving through diaspora bonds, could be as much as 5 billion, because, if the 80 billion remittances, the diaspora savings are more like 50, 60 billion a year, that Indian diasporas have outside, if you mobilize even a tenth of that, you are looking at $5 billion. I think that number is much larger than 5 billion. Reducing remittance cost can actually save $3-4 billion. Reducing recruitment costs that are paid by migrant workers, Indian migrant workers, mostly in the Gulf countries, that could bring in another billion or two. Then there is a mobilizing diaspora philanthropy. And then there are all sorts of other interesting effects that remittances bring to credit rating of the country. And because of that, they reduce the borrowing costs of the country. Also, remittances can be used as collateral for bond issuance and thereby reduce the cost of borrowing. So there's a huge potential for leveraging remittances, both at the micro household level and individual level, but also at the macro company, bank, country level. Let me stop there. I took too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dilip, for your excellent talk. Surabhi, we are almost in the time is almost the concluding remarks. So how much time I can take more? Another 15 minutes?
Sir, you could take 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. 10 minutes. Okay. Okay. So anyway, we have only 10 minutes. So let us see how it goes. And I think, I don't want to repeat what Dr. Dilip said, but I want to put something on perspective. I think there are 2-3 issues I would like to directly ask Dilip. Of course, then I will ask the audience to have 1 or 2 questions. Then we'll give probably 3 minutes for Dilip to respond. One is, Dilip, that, the stock of migrants are the predictor of remittances. It's what I always believe. People who go today, they don't send remittances. That means you should have some type of stock, say 8 million, in Gulf, or 10 million in the Gulf. I think how the stock is really affected during the COVID-19 crisis. Because just to give an example, in Kerala alone, 1.4 million people came back through Vande Bharat flight. 1.4 million, as per the Finance Minister of Kerala. And our estimate from the Kerala survey is 2.1 million stock in the Gulf, 1.4 came back. That means 2 out of 3 have already come back. How many have gone? We don't know. Anyway, the other side, we don't know. If the stock is coming down, what will be the impact on remittance? This is, I just wanted you to little bit debate on that. The second point is that, for example, even the 83 billion, what you are talking about, it is not equally distributed across states or across states. There's a very high, what I call them, inequality between states in terms of remittances. It's not equally distributed. It's not like the raise and rise given to every state, or it's not a poverty estimates. So the money is going to few pockets. I think it is going to expand. I know that. For example, you take the latest data. Some idea indicate that out of the 83 billion, 20% comes to Kerala. 20% comes to Kerala. That means out of 5 rupees come to India, 1 rupee comes to Kerala. Of course, 4 goes to other places. But that is equivalent to 30% of the Kerala state income, which is not true for India. India is only 3%. So there will be state-specific studies, state-specific impact, state-specific implication. I think there's something one has to look at it, because you are talking about India, but India has many layers like states. And finally, this is something we were discussing yesterday. Out of the 14 lakhs people came to Kerala alone, at least 2 to 3% have not received their wages during the COVID-19, what we call them wage theft. Now, suppose assuming that many people were getting low wages, of course, we know people lost jobs, people lost wages, but some people did not get their wages, final payment, so many things they lost. Suppose assuming that money also would have come, if the Gulf countries have paid their dues to our migrants, poor, unskilled migrant, then remittances would be maybe $90 billion, not even 83. What is your take on these 3 points? And I'm going to leave that points with you to think, and I'm going to open it for the other people. Anyone has a pressing question, because Surabhi said only 10 minutes. At least I would like to take 3 people to give me any question. 3 people will be first come, first basis. 3 people. You can raise your hands, or you can give in the chat box anything. I can also read to Dr. Dilip. 3 people, can you? Yeah, I can see 1 hand now. Can you introduce yourself and speak, please?
Hello, sir.
Yes, please.
Can you hear me?
I
Yeah,
can hear you.
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Rajan and Professor Dalip Rath and other dignitaries. A very wonderful and important talk. Myself, Dr. Naresh from Center for Diaspora Studies, Central University of Gujarat. Sir, I have some small query. So I would like your comment and suggestions. We have a very limited numbers of actually information in case of absolute or relative remittances data given by the RBI, Reserve Bank of India, in terms of like different occupational groups are residing in different countries. So what kind of actually approaches or mechanism has been taken by the RBI with the support of ministry to actually look in this important matter, because the remittances has been seen that important part of major changes in terms of micro and macro level contribution in the place of origin. So please highlight your comments, sir. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Naresh. I can see that Chandrasekhar Patis want to speak. Yes, please. You can unmute. You can unmute. Yes.
Yeah, Professor Rajan, you mentioned a very interesting point that huge number of people have returned to India, and Kerala has 14 lakh people returning, and there's not much of a news about their going back again to join the services, because the flight services and everything is very, very regular, and many have not opened up. And in such situation, Professor Rath's very interesting presentation mentions that there's not much of depletion in the remittances, because I'm sure there must be something which is missing, because one would expect, as we have been anticipating, there should have been quite a significant amount of depletion of resource remittances coming to India. But then the data doesn't show that. Does it mean that those who have returned have not been big contributors to the remittances? That is one way to conclude it. Those who have returned, and specifically through the flights and so on, I don't anticipate they have been much less contributors to the remittances. So the enigma, something is missing there. So maybe Dr. Rath can throw some light on this. It's very interesting fact indeed. Very interesting. Despite the huge return migration to India during the COVID situation, the remittances have not really shown much depletion. So somewhere something is missing there. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
for
we will investigate that. Divya Balan,
Yeah.
Divya Balan want to say anything? Yeah, and then we'll stop there. You can unmute, Divya Balan.
Hope I am audible. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Good evening, everyone, and wonderful presentation, sir. So I have this question, which is about also the way in which these remittances are invested in the home states. For instance, in the case of Kerala, this we have discussed for so many years now, that we invest in gold, home, land, mostly unproductive investments. So what can we do about it? I know it's a personal choice and personal decision of how to use the money, but then what can, maybe from the government side, from the state government side, or from, what can we do about it? This is always something which intrigues me. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Rajan, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Divya Bala. I think before I hand over to Dilip, we are also looking at the post-COVID scenario. In fact, I was making a comment last week to somebody. Today, if you go to the global map, according to the MEA data, Indians are present in 180 plus countries. And if you go to the global data on COVID virus, it is also present in 180 plus countries. So COVID is moving without passport and visa. Indians have both passport and visa, they are not able to move. So I think what is the post-COVID migration? It will be accelerated or decelerate. I think that is also will indicate the future of remittances. Dilip, maybe 3 minutes or 4 minutes before I hand over to Surabhi Singh.
Thank you. Excellent questions, and thanks for putting up with my rambling presentation. I think the point about stock of migrants sending money is very, very important to emphasize. And I want to bring in here a very important point, which, as an economist, I had been taught when I was already Actually, I don't think I was taught when I was in undergraduate, but I was taught in the probably master's, definitely when I did PhD at that time. It is the stock flow equation. Capital stock today is capital stock of last year plus the new investment minus depreciation. That equation isn't there in migration, and yet that migrant stock today is migrant stock of yesterday minus those who returned plus those who went again, right? New migration. So migrant stock of yesterday, new migration minus those who returned and those who died. So that's a migrant stock, and we introduced that. I sort of remember putting that in the 2009 global financial crisis, sort of then thinking, okay, those who existed last year, that's past. You can't do anything about it. So basically, the change in stock would happen because of either new people coming in or not coming in, and return migration, people either returning or returning in larger numbers. And then what does the crisis do? So during the global financial crisis, because people knew that if they leave, they cannot come back again to, let's say, US, they didn't leave to start with. They just stayed on. So actually, return migration declined. New migration declined because, again, the doors were shut. But return migration declined much more, meaning that on the net, the stock actually went up. That was one of the reasons for resilience of remittances in 2009. COVID-19 crisis had a policy-induced lockdown. People just couldn't go home, didn't want to go home, because that if you went home, God knows when you will be able to come back, because the doors are being locked now. Even now, US had just opened the doors to Indians, right? Literally yesterday or day before yesterday, after 18 months. So with that, the migration dynamics, stock of migrants sending money is very, very important. Return migration, in the immediate aftermath of return, people go home with money. People will always go. It is a tradition in every culture, and definitely in Indian culture, that you don't go home empty. You have to carry something with you. So that is one of the reasons there is resilience. But where is then the problem with the data? And secondly, what would happen in future? The problem with data is that we don't understand return migration very well. And in India, we don't understand migration, period. We don't understand anything. I told you, every number that you put on migration in India is questionable. So this is a real request to you all in the ICN. Please you are the premier think tank, premier government center. This should be a bread and butter sort of thing. You need to really work on it. And we are there to help to the extent we can. And improve data. That's basically what it is. In the future, again, if we understand what those returnees are thinking, are they going to go back home? Are they retirees that they're going to go back home to retire? Or will they bounce back immediately as soon as the situation improves? I think that's a key question to think about the future of remittances. And then the point about improving data. Rajan, you are absolutely right. In remittances to Kerala, that economy is a remittance economy. By world standards, Kerala would be up in the top 5 or so as a recipient of remittances if you compare Kerala with Tonga and Somalia and what I mean is Haiti. These are countries that receive a large amount of Tajikistan. They receive a large amount of remittance. Kerala will be in that category. We know a few states of India are highly dependent on remittances, but we don't have data on them. And I think we really need to get the granular data by doing this kind of surveys that you are doing in Kerala, the Kerala Migration Survey. We really need to do that kind of survey in Gujarat, in Punjab, in Orissa, because of the domestic migration, internal migration. Northeast is a huge issue. I think for the development of Northeast regional development angle, migration should be a very, very important focus area. So that's that. Wage theft, there is clearly a role. There is wage theft. Employers are not paying. If employers are themselves starving, they're not going to pay workers. And definitely they're not going to pay foreign workers who may go out and they have no rights anyways. So there is rampant wage theft all around. And there the embassies of India can play a major role, and NGOs, the civil society organizations, can play a major role as well. So there is clearly a role there. And I believe there is the final question on unproductive use of remittances. I think it's not a valid point to say remittances are unproductive, or when poor people eat, it is unproductive. I mean, what is productive, and why would you accumulate anything if you can't eat and you are dying, right? So poor people need to consume, and when they're poor and they receive remittances, they consume more out of remittances, which is fine. But as they become richer and become better off, they have their basic needs filled, then they go for business investments. Housing is a great investment in India, as it is anywhere in the world. Housing is a great investment because there are all sorts of property rights that come with the housing. So it's very, very important that not to think of housing as an unproductive investment. It's one of the best investment you can make. Um, so that still leaves a question. If remittances are private money and people will do whatever they want to do with it, they save some, consume some, there is multiplier effect. But in the end, if you want to build a road, how can you leverage remittances? That's where I would say first, diaspora bonds. Second, use remittances to improve credit rating, use them as collateral to improve the credit rating, credit worthiness of the bond, so the borrowing cost would go down. If borrowing costs go down, that leads to investment. So remittances can be leveraged at the household level as well as at the country and institutional level, company level, for raising capital as a financing instrument. They can then fund all kinds of investments. Let me stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Dilip. Surabhi, I am a bad moderator. I will hand over to you to make the vote of thanks to our joint secretary. Surabhi, you can. Yeah.
So JS OIA1, CU will do the vote of thanks and closing remarks.
Good evening, Professor Rajan and Dr. Dilip Ratha, and all the participants, and our chairman of ICM, Sanjay Bhattacharya ji, Surabhi, for bringing this very useful forum. So it is a really enlightening and learning experience for us in the ministry, especially the way he brought out the reasons for different levels of remittances coming from rich countries to poor countries, and the reasons for the proportionate relationship between the oil prices and remittances, and the way remittance still continue to come during the COVID period. These are the important points which we appreciate that, and we also noted the suggestions made by the speaker about collecting remittance data, not quarterly but monthly. We would endeavor to do that, and also we would like to understand more about start collecting data about the remittances actually coming to the states, so that we will understand better. We certainly agree with the view that despite so much of wide variety of mechanisms exist for migration cycle for helping migrants, but I think as it happens in a society that the exploited get more exploited, I think they take risk, they hugely invest whatever the proportion they have from their incomes, and they take risks, they go, they earn less, but even for sending back, they have to pay more. So 3% is something very huge for sending one transaction. I think it is very unfair that the financial institutions which cannot earn in over a year period in terms of interest they charge in one transactions. I think that is something which we need to consider, and we should really look at that aspect. If our policy is really to help the migrants, I think that is point which touched us very closely. But we also see that there were suggestions about remittance, leveraging the remittances, especially on the diaspora bonds, and reducing remittance cost. As I said, of course, MEA is not involved in all the issues, but certainly we will take note and share these issues to respective concerned authorities. But I think it overall very enriching and learning experience for us. We very much appreciate and wish everyone gratitude to everyone, and also wish everyone very safe and sound health in the next coming days during the COVID time. I think we are coming out of the situation which we had for last few years or few months, but I think future looks to be bright, and it should be good for even the migrants who return. And MDA makes every effort to really make sure that they return, and the issues of returning the persons who return back to India to their destination countries is very important, and it has been taken up at a very senior level, all the meetings which Prime Minister and External Affairs Minister. So that is what we are doing in our part. And as I said, that on the whole, it is a lot of important points emerged, and we took note of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Before we close, we have a small request. We'll request everyone to turn on the camera so we can take a group snap of the event.